Okay, well, thanks. First of all, I am Martha Makowski. I'm a graduate student in curriculum instruction. I'm hopefully entering my last year. Yay. But I want to just take a minute to thank everybody for being here, and thanks to George in particular for encouraging me to give this talk, because I often feel like I don't have much to say, and George is like, you have a lot to say. So again, he gave me a forum to do that. So thank you again. But I want to talk a little bit about sort of where my passion seems to lie, which is in these high school level classes that get taught in the college curriculum. And I think one of the things that I spent a lot of time explaining, like I have like everybody says, oh, what are you doing? And then I have to give everybody a lot of background. So it seemed like an opportunity to sort of present some of the background, present some of the initiatives that are currently going on. And then there'll be a sort of a breaking point. And then if people I really want to dive into these issues further, can talk about that. Or I can give you a little bit of an outline of my own research in this area and what I'm hoping to contribute. But that's kind of up to you as the participants. So just to sort of give you some background and terminology, pre-college level classes that get taught in the college level are generally referred to as remedial or developmental. There's kind of reasons why or why not you wouldn't use these words, but I tend to go with developmental because of sort of the philosophy behind it, and just I like how it sounds better. But there is sort of some baggage behind that. Each year, over 1 million students take developmental math. So it's a pretty large issue in the college curriculum that I think it's sort of hidden. Yes?
I note something which maybe you'll bring up later. But,
yes.
Uri Treisman in a talk noted an event that took place like 8 years ago, where the count of students taking calculus in high school surpassed the students taking calculus at the university. And from which he said, it's interesting that calculus is becoming a high school class. At the same time, it appears that basic algebra is becoming a university class. And what to make of that?
I did not know that. Yeah. So I mean, yeah, it is. I think, and yeah, I mean, I think this is sort of hidden, is the fact that a lot of these classes, a lot of students are taking calculus, for example, but it's hidden because a lot of the pre-college level classes get taught in community colleges. They don't get taught at places like the University of Illinois. Something like 80% is the most recent statistic I could find. 80% of students take pre-level or developmental classes outside of a university system.
And does the trajectory appear to be increasing on this?
Well, it's increased significantly. Like the number, like if you look at statistics 20 years ago, it went from like 60% to 80%. I think you're always it is sort of trending upwards, but I get the feeling that universities are kind of going, wait a minute, revenue sources, we're kicking those out. So there's sort of this tipping point between developmental coursework is a revenue source for universities, but it's also but the other side of the tension is you don't want to be the university that has a lot of remedial students or developmental students. So there's sort of this balancing point. So yeah. These classes, one of the main sort of issues why we, as people maybe want to be concerned about this, because they don't count for degree credit. But students are required to take them. So they say, oh, I'm going to go to college. And then the college says, well, but you're not actually ready for college. So take 2 years of classes that you are paying for and you're using financial aid for. But they're not actually going to count toward degree. So then once you've done all those classes, now you can take the classes that you came here to take. So there's a lot of sort of tension and politics around the fact that students are paying for this class, the governments are paying for these classes, but students aren't getting anything out of it. But they are being told that this is something they need to do because otherwise they can't get the degree. And then the other sort of problematic piece of that is the fact that the success rates tend to be low. Each one of these bullet points is sort of its own little essay or at least chapter in a book. We don't have time to go through all of them. I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking just a little bit more about why do we have so many people in these classes, and then why are the success rates low. Because if you those are sort of the meatiest, and those are probably the ones that, if I were an audience member, I might have the most questions
What's the
about.
definition of success here? They can take classes that they have, that they need for their major.
So they can get to the college level. So generally speaking, in most community colleges that I'm aware of, I would say on average there's 4 levels of developmental math, so that's 2 years of classes. It covers the K-12 curriculum, so it starts at basic arithmetic and goes through algebra. So it would be 2 years of arithmetic, 2 years of algebra. If you're in the last level, the class that once you pass it, you can enter the college curriculum, you have about a 75% chance, just statistically, of making it out of that. You might not make it the first time. You might take it, fail it, and then have to take it again. But about 75% of the people who place into that highest level of developmental coursework will get out. If you place into the lowest level, you have about a 5% chance. So when I'm saying success rates are low, I'm saying success rates just to get out of the developmental curriculum and into the college level curriculum. And then there's a whole nother set of statistics that say, now that you've made it there, how are you doing? But those success rates of students, if anything, tend to be, if you've come out of a developmental sequence, you tend to do a little bit better than the students who place there. But some people question whether it's worth it for the students. And again, a little chapter in a book where you could really take that apart. So, any other questions at this point?
Is trigonometry considered a developmental course?
Trigonometry is considered a college level class in the college curriculum, generally speaking. And I'm also speaking from the point of view of somebody who's coming from a community college lens. So like at a community college, trigonometry would be a credit-bearing class.
So would college algebra.
As would college algebra, so yeah.
It might not be at the University of
This
Illinois.
year, I think this is the first year that it got moved from 012 to 112. Now that it's 112, I believe it is. I think,
Yeah.
I don't think the math part of it. I think it's 112 now. It does offer credit.
Yeah.
I don't know. There was a recent
Yeah.
change there, and
It might be different than the major.
Right, and at least as of a few years ago, you certainly didn't get credit if you were in engineering.
Yeah.
Either college shows.
Engineering doesn't get credit for Stratton courses, it's amazing, but they don't get credit for it in engineering.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, and all of these are things that are sort of on issue. So a lot of the statistics I'm giving you are sort of from the community college level. So you can assume that they're worse if you're looking at like across 4-year school and university level classes, basically. But that's a good point. Okay.
Could you comment too about the disposition that I think a lot of students are bringing to community college when they're going there? It appeared to me, and I met Martha going around from community colleges observing these kinds of classes, and I learned a ton about what's really going on. And it appeared to me that many of the students who are showing up and placing into these developmental classes had hoped that they would never see math again.
Yes,
I
that's
really thought, I passed, I got a C in Algebra 2 in high school, didn't need it to graduate from high school, done with math, never want to see it again. Show up at, you name it, community college, and get Compass placed into these developmental courses when they want to study welding, automotive mechanics, graphic arts, things that they thought had nothing to do with math, and that they could be rid of this horrible trauma that had been their math life, and yet, and then they're like,
So the other
so it's a
question
traumatic
is, do they need it? Do they really need it?
that's a real
yeah.
question.
I do address that a little bit.
Do you actually need it?
Yeah.
If this is a mechanism to basically kill your dreams. It's very sad in a lot of ways. How do you really need it for your welding, automotive mechanics, and then you could make arguments, graphic design.
Yeah.
I have trouble with dates these days, but I think it was around the 1990s, there was a slogan that was universal, algebra for all.
Yes.
Now, that would have been about 20 years ago.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That was the mission of mathematics education, algebra for all.
And by 8th grade.
And by
In
8th
8th grade, yes.
Would you like to comment on what, do you know anything about the success of that crusade?
I don't know anything about the success of that, but I would say that that sort of initiative takes place in the K-12 curriculum. And I think there's a distinction to be made between initiatives where we say every student who's in our K-12 system has the opportunity to be an engineer, which is something that the Algebra for All initiative or the Common Core State Standards are kind of saying. They're saying, we're going to set a level of standards for our schools so that every child who goes through public schooling will have the opportunity to be an engineer. And we know that that's not what actually happens in the K-12 schooling. But there's a different argument to be made at the community college level and the college level, because now students are adults, they've had a little bit more life experience, and they're the ones who are investing in their education. And it's a different question, I think, when you're talking about should there be Algebra for All in the K-12 versus should there be Algebra for All for our adult population. And sort of some of these issues are kind of getting at, well, why so many students? And part of what this little discussion has been about is, well, it's complicated because, we know that K-12 schooling doesn't actually give all students the opportunity to access these classes. In theory, they should. But do they really? We know that doesn't happen, and again, that's a whole book. That's not just a book chapter. But we also know that some students, and if you're talking about the adult population, we know some students are returning. If you look at Illinois, for example, just what George was talking about. In Illinois, you're only required to take 3 years of math, 2 algebra, 1 geometry. And what they don't tell you, say, okay, well, I can get behind that. But what Illinois doesn't say is, it just has to say algebra on your transcript twice. You can have 2 years of algebra that covers algebra 1. And that will count towards your high school graduation. You have satisfied 2 years of algebra. And then that 4th year, you can do whatever you want. Well, that 1 year break, you lose a lot of math in that 1 year break, especially if you're on the cusp. You're probably gonna forget something and you go into college. Even if you go directly to college, you're maybe not fresh enough on your math to transition into the college level coursework. But we also have students who are returning. I was recently interviewing a student for my dissertation, and he was like, I've been a bartender for the last 8 years. I don't want to do this when I'm 40, so I'm back here at school, but I've forgotten all the math I took. So he's in a developmental class. And it's not that he wasn't able to do it in the past, it's that you forget how to take a derivative. Unless you're doing it pretty regularly. And so like these two pieces here, I think most people can say, yeah, okay, I can see a need for this sort of coursework. The piece that I think a lot of people don't realize is also going on is students don't realize that they're taking a high stakes test when they enroll in a college. Students know about the SAT, they know about the ACT, they know the stakes associated with that, but that's to get into a selective enrollment school. But then they think, oh, but that can go to a community college. Those are open enrollment. They're going to let me take a class no matter who I am. What they don't know is that when you enter a community college, because community colleges take in just about anybody, and students are coming from all over the country in some cases, or at least all over the state, the schools need a sorting mechanism. So before you get enrolled in classes, they say, well, welcome to KCC or Parkland or whatever college you're enrolling in. Step on over there, you're going to take a test. They get tested on English, or they get tested on their reading, writing, and math skills. At KCC, the average length of the test was 3 to 4 hours. Math was last. Some of us students.
This was Compass?
Yeah, the placement that could be up to 3 to. It depended on how you were doing, but it could take you up to 3 or 4 hours.
So like allowed to take as much time as they want?
Yes, and it's adaptive.
So, Janice Sebestic and Matt
They might have
Williams
changed.
and
I think they were just giving them some
took
of
the
them.
Compass.
Yeah,
And
I should guess maybe George actually knows this better. Maybe it wasn't 4 hours, but it was longer. It was.
well, I did the very best I could the first time I took the Compass, and it took me an hour and a half to place into calculus.
That was
Yeah,
just
and
the
again,
math,
and
but
there
you
was
weren't
a
also
ton
taking
of trigonometry.
the reading
I
and the
wasn't taking
writing.
any of the others.
Yeah.
And then I took it again, they let me take it again. And I gave random answers to the first 5 questions, and then did the best I could after that. But I only got to answer another 5 or 6 questions, and bam, I'm in algebra 1 or pre-algebra.
Really?
Yeah. So as Janice says, it gets you to stupid really fast.
Yeah, it
So I
does.
mean, if you, for example, are a bit rusty on fractions or percentages, you're done before you ever get to the trig you may or may not know.
Yeah, so yeah. And so, I mean, and especially if you're imagining at KCC, math was last, you've already taken a reading test, you've already taken a writing test, and now they're giving you a math test. And you're just like, I don't care. The answer is C. You don't realize that there's high stakes. And again, you know, some of the students might be rusty if they understood the stakes. Maybe if they just gone home, studied for a week, came back, they would do just fine. Or if you said you can take a break, you can take the reading today and you can come back and take the math tomorrow, maybe they would do fine. But there's a certain percentage of students that get placed into these classes that didn't understand the stakes. And I think this percentage is larger than we might expect. And I know the University of Illinois has Alex, and it's sort of a similar idea as it's helping students work through. It's assuming the students have the knowledge, but they need to refresh it. So there's, yeah, anyway, but that's sort of part of it. Okay.
Will you take it once in a month if they just?
Depends on the school. I can't remember what the policies were at Kankakee, but Adam?
Do students have access to practice materials before they go to these community college placement exams? Like, is there an online, at least an option, like go practice it first, while get used to the interface, get used to the types of questions, you know, kind of just before they go take the real one?
When I was at KCC, I don't think they had such a thing. But there was an effort at KCC to educate the incoming students that this was a high stakes test while they were still in high school.
Just like everything, I think about data with ACT, that even just taking it twice scores go up. You know, and so for here, it's
Yeah.
the first time they're doing this placement exam, and they haven't thought of math over the summer. I mean, just, you know, it was.
Yeah, I
take it
mean,
twice, they
there
scores
is,
be higher.
and again, but and then it kind of gets into that student deposition. I said that wrong, but that a lot of them say, well, if it's between me just taking it now and I have to come back, a lot of them will just take it now because that effort of coming back, or so you have to, if for that to work, you really have to get the information to them before they walk in the door. And again, for a certain percentage of students, some of them just decide one day to go to college. They haven't decided in February that next year I'm going to go to Parkland College. They've decided in August that they're going to Parkland College next week. And so it's...
So that decision that you're preparing for it, like taking practice exam is not something that is on the radar. for a lot of
Yeah.
students.
Some kid, it's a misnomer to say kids. That they'll say things like, I got bills to pay. You know, and
Yeah.
they're sitting in they're sitting in what you think is a high school or even middle school class. And, but they have adult responsibilities. And they're kind of academically being sort of kicked back.
Yeah.
It's really
Which
it's a
goes
whole
into-
disorienting feel that I think kids are young people are thrown into as they're trying to kind of go to the next level in what's called higher education.
Yeah. It's a real paradigm shift for people who have sort of grown up in the education pipeline like myself. It's you know, it really takes a long time to get into that space and go, wow, okay, you know, this student is crying in my office. She has 13 children. Her husband doesn't work, you know, and she's apologizing to me because her math homework is 10 minutes late. And just like, just, you're an A student, you know, please, like, don't do the homework. I'll give you an A as long as you do well on the test, you know. It's.
But if you took and ask each instructor to actually list the things that they have to know in mathematics. Not that would be nice to know, but the things they really have to know. Do you think that would be a great deal?
That's a big question. I think that it depends on who you're talking to, honestly. I think at community colleges, you have sort of the traditionally minded instructors, and you have the instructors who sort of are asking some of the questions that I'm in graduate school to ask, and there is a push to ask new questions. I've got questions later. But I think they're also, I think most of them, even the ones who are sort of questioning, what do students need to know, will acknowledge that we have these structural pressures. The Illinois State Board of Higher Education says that in order for them to be accredited, you have to teach these things. And the reason they're saying that is because the universities, like the University of Illinois, is saying, well, we don't want students who haven't done these things. So even if you're sort of saying, well, to be a mathematically sophisticated individual who's existing in the world but isn't maybe in an academic track, you still need to do these things because structurally we use mathematics as the sort of gatekeeper, and it's institutionalized at the state level. Yeah.
My contact with Parkland has been mainly, several things, but one of my really contacts with Parkland is dental technicians who are in my mouth every 6 months. I have talked to these people, and I have the impression that they need to know zero mathematics beyond the most basic arithmetic.
Yeah, they need a different set of mathematics, yes, for their careers. I would say most people would agree with that who really think critically about the math curriculum. And the health profession has its own math track, so they actually their math curriculum diverges fairly early if that's your major. But there's a lot of stuff.
The same ballpark, right? Even if they're a dental technician, but their compass test places them really low, they still have to make it through these developmental courses to get into the.
They need arithmetic, and then they need a class in medical conversions. So they take arithmetic, and then I think they take a
CCs to leaders.
yeah. So, but yeah. So these are all great questions. See, these are all great questions. But to and we sort of touched on some of these, the success rate ties into a lot of things. The social factors that George was sort of alluding to, the fact that these students do have children, they have families, they are, probably have a full-time job, or at least a part-time job. I, for my dissertation study, regularly run into one of the students in my study at Schnucks. There's also this cooling out function that if you've only read one paper on community colleges, you've probably read about the cooling out phenomena, which is that basically by putting students in these classes, we're kind of implicitly telling them, academics isn't so much for you. Maybe you don't want to get this career. Maybe you want to diverge over here or cool your aspirations out. And there is some truth to this because these classes, as sort of alluded to before, they create a financial barrier, they create a time barrier, and these classes come with opportunity costs for the students because they probably have to work and they need to work. They have to decide, is it worth it to spend $400 in tuition this semester if I could work and earn $600 in that same period of time? And they're playing the 10-year game, the 20-year game. Is that career going to be worth it? And then even once they've made that decision and said, yes, education is okay, something happens that says, well, grandma needs 10 hours of care. You're already not working and you've only sunk $400, so why don't you take care of grandma? Because you can go back because it's open enrollment. These sort of cooling out interplays with the social factors, and then once you get all those pieces, there's also sort of students have to believe that it's relevant. So for that dental technician, if we're making them do a lot of algebra and they think that they want to be a dental technician, but this is kind of a waste of their time, they're gonna kind of exit because they don't think that it's relevant, or they're not gonna buy in enough. So, and I mean, this is one of the, and I mean, you hear this in university students because they always want to know, at least in the College of Ed, we hear it all the time, how is this going to help me when I'm teaching? I mean, if you talk to a lot of students who aren't just in it because they really love math or they want to know exactly how they're going to use it if it's not something that they see it directly ties to what they're doing. But community college students, because they come with this extra layer of sort of social forces that are why they're in the community college, really value knowing and seeing the relevance of everything that they learn. Okay, yeah.
Is it possible there's, another
Oh.
input into this?
Yes,
demonstration?
these are just three that
I
I,
wonder what you've seen as far as core instruction. Like, who's teaching these remedial courses? Do you have instructors that bought in, or is it like, well, I got to teach remedial group? All right, here we go. You're supposed to know this, but anyway, here's your one shot at it.
yes,
Move quickly. I mean, or you get people who are passionate, saying, okay, I'm passionate. I've had really, just development math instruction, so let's really make the most of the situation. Obviously, though, I would think that I wonder who's teaching the remedial courses.
yeah, no, that's a good point, and it's one that I don't talk about a lot. There is partially because there isn't a lot of done research on the difference between. You can't find a lot of data that really honestly can compare the teaching of somebody who's an adjunct and someone who's full-time. A lot of adjuncts do teach in community colleges. Something like 50% of courses in community colleges are taught by non-full-time faculty. My experience as an adjunct was generally that the adjuncts cared pretty passionately about it, and for the most part enjoy teaching the developmental curriculum, partially because to teach in that curriculum you only need a subject level bachelor's. A lot of them are retired high school teachers who just love teaching and want a couple $1,000s a year, or they're people like me who are trying to get into the game. So my sense is that the difference between adjunct and full-time wouldn't be the primary explanation. I think it's a lot more about the student level factors, not to put the blame on the students. And I mean, there is certainly issues with adjunct instruction versus full-time instruction. But I feel like most of the people I knew who were adjuncts were pretty passionate about teaching.
And based on what I saw, that there wouldn't be distinctions in, adjunct versus full-time, or even math credentials versus non, or even experience. It appeared to me whether or not, the difference was whether or not you had a passion for the experiences of the students that you had, or whether some people are covering content, and it's
That's
just
true.
like what
That's
you
a good
see
point.
when they do in the high school or in the university. If you're covering content, you're writing on the board, they're taking
That's
notes,
true.
they follow it or they don't. And other people who have a passion for relating to where those kids are and kind of just, and those adults, what's the average age?
26 and a half or something like that.
So those adult learners, a lot of times it feels like an intense therapy session. Moving around, talking, wrestling with ideas, trying to get people to work together in groups. I mean, that, and this is my interpretation, to kind of undo or ameliorate the stress that these people are bringing to mathematics. So, and at its best, and that's what I saw. And,
That's true. That's a good
and
point.
I don't think it would correlate with any of the other adjuncts versus non-adjuncts.
Is there a correlation between the teacher and the rate of success of the students?
happen?
When I was at College of DuPage, they ran it actually for the adjuncts versus the full-time faculty, and the adjuncts did better than the full-time faculty in
This
the.
is a group, but you as individuals?
I'm not sure, honestly. There is, I mean, to be honest, there isn't a huge amount of research at the classroom level in community colleges. And the research there isn't very deep yet. I think it's coming. But yeah. So, any other questions? These are all like great points.
There are meaningful questions around it because of, well, first of all, what's happening in K-12 that 2/3 or more of students are placing into classes, the content of which has already been covered. What are the financial incentives for institutions to maintain these developmental classes? And what are the incentives for the testing programs that place them? What are the real needs of the mathematical content for the careers that people want?
Mm-hmm. And then what are the sort of
Yeah, once we delve too deeply,
critical
then
math?
we'll have to address some of those questions, and
Yeah,
they're uncomfortable.
yeah. So I was gonna try and get some audience participation, but there's been a lot. I was gonna give you this sort of, this is sort of a scenario. We've kind of touched on this with your question. Basically, I'm saying this is a true story. I taught intermediate algebra, which is the last class at KCC. I taught it about once a semester, maybe. And in this class, you do a lot of things like rationalizing the denominator and simplifying complex exponential expressions. And I think even if you're lucky, you get to do matrices. But I mean, there's a lot of stuff in there, and it's mostly lecture with applications at the end. And I had two students who really, worked hard. One was going to be a nurse. It was very clear she wanted to be a nurse. One was going to be a firefighter. It was very clear he wanted to be a firefighter. And they would often just sort of say, I want to do well in this class. I get it, but I just don't understand why we're doing it.
Can you in a few words tell me how you persuade somebody that it's in their interest to learn how to rationalize it?
Well, I was going to ask everybody if you were in this situation, what would you say?
Rationalizing the denominator.
Or just in general, like why are they learning these things? It doesn't have to be rationalizing the denominator per se, but
That's an egregious thing.
it's in the
I'm
curriculum.
having a heart attack when the EMT comes. Prove to me that you can complete a square.
So, so what would you say?
Maybe.
It doesn't have to be these in particular, but what would you say to those students?
Well, I would say this, and it's pretty stupid what I would say. I would say, there was a time before we had calculators, when people had to do some arithmetic by hand. And if you compare dividing the square root of 2 into 1 as if taking the square root of 2 and dividing it by 2, the latter is a very efficient way of doing it. So if you're in the business of needing to do that kind of thing, and you're in a desert island without a calculator, then it behooves you to learn how to do this. So before you go on a cruise, play it safe.
Does anybody else?
Good answer?
I would say
You have a
it's.
better one?
I would honestly just,
Too much of it breathing, Justin.
It is solar powered.
depending on how I was feeling, I would sometimes say, sometimes your college degree is just about proving that you can do things. And sometimes I would say something to the effect of what you said, that, some of the things we learn are preparing you for, our artifacts. But also, I think rationalizing the denominator does, in some ways, help anticipate advanced algebraic operations we do when we simplify the denominator of algebraic expressions that are factored, or we have square roots So it's, I mean, really advanced algebra, but it is anticipating that. That's a skill you would use in advanced algebra. So yeah, so it kind of depending on my mood. I had a range of answers, but
I'd like to ask you, I mean, it's tough because there's a notion that you never convince someone that they are going to use this.
Yeah.
They may not. So,
Yeah.
do they know what they're going to be doing 10 years from now, or 20 years from now, or 30 years from now? And probably not. I don't know either. So I don't know if you're going to use this ever again or not in your life. I don't know. But usually there's two things I know that I can try and help sell them on. One is the idea that whether they use it or not, that learning math's a unique subject that offers certain types of called brain power, certain types of logical reasoning and thinking skills that are kind of unique to the discipline, that they're strengthening those muscles. Because they do that, also more opportunity, like you said, that in our society, that more math classes we can take, it provides more opportunity, more doors open. As far as if you can get through this class and learn this, more doors open. Some doors you may not be interested in, other doors you may be. So if you work hard now and apply this capacity courses, and so that's maybe an unjust system. So math is a filter to open those doors.
But
that's the system we live in. And if you want to open those doors, you kind of need to play the game a little bit and go through it.
And I mean,
that's the question Peter was saying earlier, which is a bigger question.
And community college students, will, and they appreciate. I mean, they appreciate your honesty in some respects. Like they kind of know when you're pulling their chain a little bit. And if you're saying no, I recognize that this isn't relevant to the fact that you want to be a firefighter, but let me tell you why it is relevant to your life, and they can go, okay. Yeah.
Also say, even though they may not use it directly, but these are the things that led to the computers. Like mathematics is the foundation, like these concepts, complex numbers that would led to the instrument you're using, right?
Yeah.
You're using all through your life. Maybe in the future you're more interested to understand how these things work.
Yeah.
That's what you
Yeah.
need. But maybe if you can decide you don't want to know, they just read the number, it's fine. But
Yeah, and I mean, I think the critical thinking piece that Adam's talking about, and the sort of the structural issue, I mean, all of these things are things that I have said and tried, but I think they're also valid questions, and they're questions that we who design the curriculum need to be aware of and think about. And now that we know computer architecture is not going away unless we have some event, in which case our problem is not rationalizing the denominator. Let's keep these questions in mind. So these are questions. I promised questions. So these are sort of questions I found myself asking, and also I found that others were asking as well, as part of my initiative. So why do we make adult students who plan to pursue a career that does not require advanced algebra take developmental math classes that prepare them for advanced algebra? Why do we teach adult students using math using lecture, drill, and practice when we know this method didn't work for them in the past? Why is it going to work suddenly, magically, when they're 18? And so then, and so sort of if you're asking yourself these questions and you're disturbed by these questions, then I think a natural question is, are there ways to make the curriculum more relevant to developmental students while also honoring the fact that mathematics does play a really important role in our life and underlies so many things that make our lives possible? And you can't do anything, you can't go a day without in some way applying math, whether you want to admit it or not. And helping students at least recognize that there is value to this body of knowledge.
Getting to your computer thing.
Yeah.
How many people know stereolithography and how to make a computer chip? We use them all the time. But how many people actually know how to make the computer chip? I mean, don't you need to know that if you're going to use a computer? Isn't that kind of what you're saying with the math? Computers use math, okay, so you have to learn math. Computers use chips. How do you make a computer chip?
We use bridges every day, and I bet most of the people in this room would have no idea the first step in building a bridge.
Right.
We don't have to take intro to mechanical engineering classes at college.
There's kind of this idea that math underlies everything, and sure, but science underlies everything.
why is it that we don't require so much science? Why, you know, do you know what I mean? There's
Down with the math curriculum.
It's kind of a basic sciencey kind of thing. Why do we not require that? But we do require the math. Why not the science?
Mostly history.
Huh?
Well,
yeah, I mean,
there is no
but historically, science has been very important.
I had the same problem in school with a group, and I was lucky to have a group, you know, nobody cares what they will learn, so I could do whatever I want. I couldn't say you have to learn it because they knew they don't have to learn. They did it for 10 years. They didn't learn anything. Why would they have to learn it now when they are in the 11th grade or something? And they were mechanic, auto mechanic. That was but in the school. And so I asked, what do you want to learn? Probably you want fractions because you don't know fractions. No, that we had enough in class. Never mind, they didn't. So I went to the teachers in the auto mechanics and I asked what would they use, and we found some things that we started from there. But that's not the main. The story was that once they started to see that there is something in it, they asked me later to learn fractions. And that was a really nice thing. They found that there is something, so we had to change. There is a way around
Yeah.
for many things.
You know, different
And
societies.
that's kind of what you say. There is a beauty and there is something in it for the human mind.
Different societies look at these problems somewhat differently. I'll give you two quick examples, both from Germany. In Germany, to get a driver's license, you need to take a test on how the internal combustion machine works, and you know how the engine or cycles and all that stuff. You need to know that. And I don't think any German has ever asked the question of why do I need to know that? The state tells you you need to know that. The other thing I thought was fascinating. I have a friend who's a well-to-do lawyer in Bavaria, actually, and he had decided when he was middle-aged that he wanted to learn how to fish. And you know, so he had to get a fishing license. That is a matter of a 2-year program. A lot of, I think they meet once a week for 2 hours. He had to be able to identify all the fish of Bavaria. I mean, and it was just a feeling, if you're gonna fish, you should know what you're doing. None of this, you know, all of the water.
How else are you gonna know when you discover a new species that has never before?
So yeah, but yeah, so I think your point and in general, these are like, I think these are sort of questions. So it sounds like people are sort of, I have one more slide that I think to go. So to sort of wrap up, and then there'll maybe be like a couple minutes left. But some of the things that people have tried to sort of address some of these questions. Some people have said, well, let's not change what gets taught, but let's let students work at their own pace so that, you know, we're not penalizing students. Those have had marginal to little success, because if you can't teach yourself, then you need, you know, basically those don't work terribly well, but I mean, it works for some students, like the students who took that summer off or took that year off. These programs work fairly well for students who just really need to warm up again. High school and curriculum alignment, which is how George and I met, which is not just the high schools talking to the colleges and the colleges talking to the high schools, but also the colleges talking to the students and saying, high stakes tests when you enter community college. Let's let you know where you stand so you can make decisions to prepare yourself for college if you even think that might be an option for you. Those initiatives are showing some value, like students, if you give them the information, make the choices we hope they would make. But it's not enough, because we still have a lot of students who are placing into these classes. They're not going away. We're capturing some, but we're not capturing all of them. So then sort of rethinking what we teach and how we teach it. And so that's kind of where my dissertation is. There are a lot of and that's sort of been a movement in like the last 5 years, but restructuring the curriculum, restructuring the pedagogy, taking out, rationalizing the denominator, adding more pathways. So like if you are not going to be, I said earlier that nursing has its own sort of math pathway. Now we're saying non-STEM majors have a different pathway than STEM majors. It's still fairly early. Illinois is one of the leading states in this. And it's only really, the classes have only been around for about 5 years. Parkland, I think, is in its 3rd year. And I think they were the 3rd community college to sort of do it on a large scale. So.
Is the endpoint kind of simple or not? I mean, if you do this non-STEM whatever, you still
No,
have
the
to get-
endpoint has changed.
and so you still don't have to get to, like, pre-calculus and stuff.
You don't do that. You do different things. So if you're on the STEM pathway, you still do basically, you might do it a little bit differently, but you still would effectively do through intermediate algebra, then you would go into trig, then college algebra, and then calculus. If you're on the non-STEM pathway, they're tracking you into a class that's mostly problem-based, so it's problem solving, it's group work, and it's got more statistics. So instead of doing the rationalizing denominator, they're adding statistics, and they're adding a technology component, so they're learning how to manage an Excel spreadsheet to solve math problems, and that kind of thing. So they've added things in, so it's sort of they're still getting a large body of curriculum. They haven't like just said, well, you're not taking this last class. They're saying you're going to cover the same thing, but we're going to cover it differently. So you're not going to do a lot of solving naked algebra problems and a lot of graphing naked equations. You're going to do that, but you're going to look at them in the context of you're buying a car or you're depreciating a car or.
So the endpoint is kind of the same.
The endpoint is kind of the same, except for the topics are different. So you're more on a pre-stats track. So they've added content in, which you wouldn't get if you were in the other pipeline. So, does that make sense?
Kind of. So they've added stuff, but they've subtracted
They've taken out kind of the things that you wouldn't use in a statistics class. So you're in a statistics class, you're going to solve system of equations occasionally. So you're still doing that, but you're not going to do a lot of. You're not going to rationalize. I keep going to that one because that's the one I can think of off the top of my head. They might do the quadratic formula, but they don't derive it because occasionally you run into the quadratic formula and it's good to know how to use it. But do you need to derive it and complete the square and that kind of thing? No, you're saying you learn how to use formulas. They add interest formulas, and you don't usually do interest formulas until you get to a college level class, but they, say, look, we want you to be able to navigate these mathematical situations. So we're going to add a unit on exponential functions and manipulating exponential functions and evaluating exponential functions.
It seems to me that number sense that people would have around the computations that most people have to deal with, figuring out your mortgage, your interest payments on your credit card, being able to deal with rates when it comes to money. Those things seem immediately applicable in a way that a lot of the rigor around algebra, it's hard to justify to someone who's asking for the relevance, the day-to-day relevance of it. So, go ahead, I'm done. Yeah.
This is just to show you from personal experience how people live in different worlds. I taught a course, it wasn't about mental, I don't think, but I taught a course many, many years ago in which I asked the question, why do even simple handheld calculators have a square root sign on them? I mean, adding mathematics, subtracting, multiplying, dividing, that's really clear. Why do they have a square root on them? And one student raised their hand and he said, because if you have a square rug that's 15 square feet, and you want to know what the length of the side of that rug is, then you would have to take the square root of 15 to find that out. I thought I was going to lose my teeth. I said, when was the last time whoever even thought about a problem like this? And they all said, well, not that one, but problems like that we do all the time. Well, it turned out they don't do them all the time. There wasn't a kid in that class who said, the reason we do it is because of statistics. Square roots come up when you want to calculate variances and standard deviations. And that, I think, is somehow a failure of teaching what's it good for.
Would they have had a?
Well, I
I mean, this statistics isn't even a part of the high school curriculum.
Well, don't they do that in the third year of high school? They teach them about standard deviation.
It's supposed to be integrated, but it's.
It's very little. You can take AP stats if you're really ambitious, but a lot of people take AP Calc instead. Statistics is not stressed in school. I actually got more statistics in my psychology class than I ever did in math. Psychology than in math.
I'm gonna push statistics still just now. And I don't think someone will, of course.
Anyway, that was my experience, is that kids have really make up bizarre stories to justify what they're
Oh, we
doing.
know since that, they learned that in math classes, all the people, most of the programs are pretty slick and very far-fetched.
Right.
Well, that's where the desert island metaphor, or, scenario comes up, right? It's like, when will I use this? Why do I need to learn this?
I like to go with
Max
this.
Lieberman used to say, and I think it's largely true, is that when a kid asks you what's it good for, he's not asking you a question, he's telling you something. I don't understand this stuff.
It is an expression of frustration,
Frustration.
but, yeah.
Kind of curious as to, instead of rethinking every course, redesigning how everything's done, why don't classes just get broken down into smaller sections, not sections, but shorter time lengths? So it's not a semester of algebra that covers this wide variance of things you probably won't need or maybe you will need parts of, and not break that up into 4-week, 8-week, 16, whatever.
Yeah,
classes,
they
and
do
then
try
each
that.
College picks, the very specific details of what you need.
They have tried that. One of the issues that arises with that model is you need a critical mass of students. So a lot of Parkland is a large community college, so they have a critical mass, and they have actually gone with like one credit level classes where like it's 4 weeks, 4 weeks, 4 weeks, 4 weeks. But you need a lot of students to do that because you will constantly have students exiting and entering, and then you need to make sure you have enough of so we know that the third unit really is stressful for students, so we need to have so you need a lot of students to make sure the classes get filled, and a lot of community colleges don't have that many students. Like I'd say Kankakee, where I was, had, let's see, I don't know, we had 7 full-time math faculty. So I think we had about 10,000 students overall, but we only had about 2,000 full-time students, which isn't really enough. You had 2 math classes running every hour. It was just not enough to keep it up. And because it also runs into student scheduling, so it's just, logistically, you need a lot of students to do that. That's the short answer.
What are the numbers for U of I for what would be called developmental courses? How many students are placing into non-credit bearing math?
I don't know, I'd say a few hundred, but I'm really, I'm just guessing in the dark, maybe 400 or 500, the freshman class.
400 or 500?
Yeah, that would be 10% or less. But that is a guess, I don't know.
And they're placed through Alex?
Yes.
Because everybody takes.
Everybody takes Alex.
And can they take as many times as they want?
I think so,
or-
yes.
Yeah, Alex is.
And they take it at home in an unproctored environment, which isn't, I think, bad, it's got to know, so like if students wanted to have some help over their shoulder.
They certainly could.
They could.
Okay,
Um,
and they could
or-
be
or-
leafing through books or whatever.
They could, obviously,
do whatever they want.
obviously, it doesn't give them any credit though, if they score high in that, they just start
It's
higher
in
class, if they're not ready for that, they're gonna be in
Okay.
problem. But it is interesting to note that it's unproctored at home, it's on your computer, it's gonna do it just for, not every, that's how Illinois does it. I mean, other people still have sit-down proctored tests at other universities, I think there's a mix
Oh,
out there.
I did not know that.
My Alex took something like 6 hours. I was doing it very slowly and
Holy
like eating and stuff during it, but I took the entire exam because my math department was pretty good about getting us ready for this stuff, and I was, in the AP math courses. So I had to answer probably every question on the exam or close to it, as opposed to just getting kicked out when they decide you don't know algebra. And
So
the test is
what
over.
was your first math class here at the university?
I qualified for Calculus 3, but my advisor suggested I take Calculus 2 if I didn't feel like I was ready for it, and I had to register before I had my AP scores back, so I took Calculus 2. But I could have started in Calc 3.
But you could have placed out of it by Alex and your AP scores.
I don't think Alex told them that I was able to place out of Calc 2. My instructor, and I'm remembering something that happened 4 years ago now, my advisor, when I came for my registration during the summer, looked at my Alex scores, which is the only thing they had, and then my grades in my high school calculus courses, and said, well, your Alex is really strong, but that only got you out of like the algebra courses and stuff like that.
Oh.
And then he looked at my calculus stuff, but if I'd done poorly on the Alex stuff for like linear algebra and similar things, I don't think they would have
But
recommended
there
me
was
for
linear
calculus.
algebra on the Alex?
There was, I remember because that's the only section I did poorly on. I'm bad at linear algebra.
And there was actual calculus on the Alex too?
I don't remember.
Oh, no, okay.
If I
No.
remember right, the Alex can't give you credit for anything, it just
No.
keeps you from
It's
being.
just
It keeps you from
Yeah.
getting placed,
It's
I
just
think
trying
it
to
keeps you
play.
from getting placed into the bad stuff.
Yeah,
So when I say they didn't get credit for, it really means they
Right,
didn't
that-
place me in the courses that I wouldn't get credit for anyway.
Yeah.
Because I was about Calc 1 placement, like, I believe you can't start in Calc 1 here unless you have above a certain Alex
Oh.
score,
I-
and you didn't get above that.
And the only way you get credit for calculus is through an AP score.
Right.
Not for any taken from high
Okay,
school.
okay, so Alex alone will not let you
No.
skip any
But
calculus
if I
or
done-
linear algebra.
If I'd done poorly on the Alex, they might have assumed that I cheated on my exams or something. Like, if I came in with a really terrible Alex score and then the calc scores that I had, which were good, from high school and the AP exam, well, I would tell the advisor that I don't actually know anything.
Yeah.
You know, it's not that hard to cheat on an AP exam. So, it's, it doesn't give you credit, but at the same time, it is important to do well on the Alex.
I was talking with Allison Reddy about, she teaches college algebra here just the other day, we were talking about some things around this, and she was saying how a lot of students at UI who are in her class feel duped. Because I felt like in high school, they passed like high school pre-calculus, or did algebra 2, they had C's or B's,
Right.
and then they felt like they,
Stomping on stuff.
but then when they took this Alex exam, they scored really low and now are in these developmental classes, and she used to express to them that they felt duped, felt like they were supposed to be prepared for this and they weren't, they did what they were supposed to do in high school overall, and that was just their sentiment, their disposition,
Yeah.
how they felt.
Yeah.
That feels legit to me,
Mm.
a legitimate,
So,
no, that there's something wrong.
Yeah, I
That,
feel like
that
something's
you
wrong.
can move
There's-
through the prerequisites, and then somebody says, no, not for you, not for you anymore.
We take it back.
Yeah,
if you do the AP, you still have to do the Alex?
Yes, everyone takes the Alex.
By the time you register, AP scores aren't in.
Yeah, I didn't have my AP scores until I was very close to starting, and after after I registered for my classes, which is how I ended up in Calc 2, which ended up being.
Some people take AP classes their junior year too, right?
Yes, okay, so if you took your Calc scores your junior year, then you already have those when you go to registration. I did not have the option to take, in my high school, I didn't have the option to take calculus until I was a senior.
Yeah,
So, but, I mean, there's some schools that have, you take the STEM AP really early. My first AP exam I took when I was a sophomore.
Yeah, I took my first as a sophomore, but it was history.
Yeah, it was,
Were you guys given APs? Because like in my school, you had to pay for them.
we
We had to pay.
paid to take the AP exams, but In my school, it was assumed that you were going to graduate with 2 AP courses. Everyone took everyone took both the AP Englishes. I was at a college prep school. But I graduated with 9 APs, and that was kind of the upper end of what people in my class took. I think one of my friends took 11, and that was like the most that anyone had ever really taken in my school.
I mean, I know people come, but so the math AP stuff doesn't count as credit?
At my high school or at my college?
Here, if you come in,
depends on what
if you
you're
took the AB and BC, the Calc AB and BC,
So I took
does that count as credit?
Calc
Yes,
BC.
yes, if you score high enough, yes.
Yeah.
That's the only way the freshman can show up and get credit for calculus is with a good enough AP score.
And so they might not have to take
Or
math
community college.
here.
Oh, yeah,
Well,
absolutely.
Dual enrollment is
If-
something else. Yeah, I could have shown up and not taken calculus 2. I don't think I can qualify out of calculus 3.
Do you have?
Correct, you
Yeah.
cannot.
But not all majors require calculus.
No.
So is it possible to come, and I don't even know why I'm asking, but is it possible to come to the U of I and not take any math class because you've done?
Oh,
the AP?
absolutely,
Okay.
absolutely.
Okay.
I didn't have to take an English class. I mean, I did take English classes, but I didn't have to.
I didn't. I didn't take
So-
some history, English, whatever class.
So do we know anything about the comparability of AP classes to those taken at the university?
I have not looked into that. I would say that universities generally know the exam and they know what they want in their curriculum, and so the universities are the one that are making those determinations.
Yeah,
So
a few years ago, Peter, they raised the bar from a 3 to a 4.
On the AP.
On
Well, for some.
Yeah, the minimum score that they would give credit for. But yeah, I think there's a sense that if the student gets a 4 on the AP exam, that they know it at least as well as our average student who takes it here.
What's the difference between the Calc AB and the BC?
So the AB can place you out of Calc
Calc
1 at the most, and the BC can place you out of Calc 2 into Calc 3.
But you take actually both, when you take the AP exam, you actually take both AB and BC if you're trying to take the BC exam. So you'll get a score for AB and for BC. So if you stretch and take the BC exam, even if you're not sure you're ready for it, it doesn't mean you lose the chance to get out of Calc 1. At least if your university does, that sort of thing.
And is the Parkland Calc 2 and Calc 3 articulated perfectly, so you
Yeah,
you
yes,
can move right over?
Uh-huh,
If you've got a passing grade in Calc 3 at Parkland, you've got
Yeah.
you can pass out of AP.
Yes.
at UH. Is the textbook the same, or the
I think so.
instru-
Yeah, I think so.
instructors know each other and stuff?
I don't know about that, but the
Okay.
textbook's the same.
At least for the engineering college, when I was talking to my advisor when I was registering, he kind of had the sense that a lot of people take the calculus AP exams and do well, but still don't know calculus. And because we do math beyond the calculus level, he suggested to a lot of students that especially if you took it and you did well but didn't feel like you did great, that you didn't have good material, that you take the Calc 2 over again especially.
I don't think the BC really covers Calc 2. It's like the AB plus Taylor series, maybe?
Yeah, I did decently in Calc. I mean, I did good in Calc, the Calc 2 class I took, but I didn't have to. But I'm glad I took it. I would have felt very uncomfortable, not in going into Calc 3, but going into like linear algebra and stuff like that, not knowing what I learned in my Calc 2 course here. It was.
A question and a comment. How does the net, but I guess it's called net math calculus now. How does that fit into the scheme of things?
Well, I mean, it's just a distance learning thing. In terms of content, I suppose it's about the same. I really don't know. But it is just an online.
Yeah, well, I know what it is, but can you tell from the transcript that it's the one or the other?
I don't know. I bet you can't, but I don't know. I don't know.
I have an interesting little anecdote to tell you. Some years ago, I was talking to one of my colleagues at Eastern over dinner, and I said, I noticed that you have a special course in power series. There's a course, one semester course in series. I said, I've never heard of that. Usually that's part of Calc 2, and you do other things, polar coordinates and stuff like that. And he said, well, we got smart because power series are notoriously difficult. Students never understand them. but they can get through the Calc 2 on the strength of the polar coordinates. And so we segregated all that stuff out, now we insist that they actually know something about power series. I thought that was kind of interesting. I don't know if they still do it or not.
So, there was lots of interaction on this.
Yeah.
Don't worry about that, but
This was if there was time, I was going to talk about my dissertation, but there wasn't, so that's good.
Oh, no.
No.
Give us the abstract.
It's fine.
You will come back. You will come back. And do
Because
the
I mean,
abstract.
when we talked about this, you were just like, well, this is like something. I guess I'm always a little bit surprised how many questions people have, because I've really lived and breathed these issues for almost 10 years, and I forget how hidden a lot of these issues are from people. So.
It's a barrier, I think, for a lot of people, and I don't know if there's anything comparable to being that kind of a barrier in college. I mean, you have to go through so much math, you have to pass it.
Mhm.
And every other subject, English, even though English is lots of times required, there are other ways kind of, do you know what I mean? It's the math that is
Yeah.
kind of
It feels to me, Peter has said I make too much of this, but I can't feel it. It feels to me as though math, and math alone,
Yeah.
is our primary mechanism to reproduce social structures. That, no, really, that is, people who are in power, wealthy, affluent, high socioeconomic status, know how to prepare their kids for math in schools, and math tests can be relied upon to reproduce those structures. And so we don't want to subject them to too much critique, because it's threatening. And I think this is overwhelming evidence of that point of view being correct. But
People don't talk about it.
and we don't want to talk about it because it's at the core, I think, of
And what you
of
hear
what
is
we do in
Success
terms
rates in
of
community colleges are low.
reproducing.
You know, like, what are we going to do about it? It's like, look, this is by design. This is
It is
not.
by design, that's right, it is by
Like,
design.
So these are, I mean, like, but people are presenting it like we should be concerned, and it's like, this is what it's set up to do.
And
And it's a waste to let people sit for so many years without pay. I mean,
And well, and the narrative is by and large, well, how do we get more math to more people? Not, are we using math for inappropriate purposes? Math as as a subject, you know, for inappropriate social purposes. And it's
Especially
really
because I think in professional mathematicians certainly are not generally exemplars of a life well led.
Sometimes I wonder when people making the curriculum standards have ever had the experience of really struggling through a math class, like having it, like not understanding the
Right.
material. 'Cause
I agree.
if you go far enough,
You're right.
eventually you will find a course that you struggle with and you will have that experience. But if you stop taking it before you get to the point where you start struggling, then it's hard to understand the experience of somebody who's
I
not
think
like
that's really
doing poorly.
important.
I think that's a really important point.
Coursework, I want to have passed their classes, just in general.
But like, you know, I think it's sometimes hard for people. I had friends in high school who couldn't really understand when other people were struggling with material that they got easily. And I think it's something you have to experience to kind of be able to empathize and realize that it's not everyone is going to have the natural, you know, whether it's something that, because they're exposed to it more than their kids or whatever, not everyone is going to get math as easily as.
And it's very easy to learn that you can also do it. So it's another thing. And they are very good at doing it as well.
Also,
Thank you,
thank you for
Martha.
listening.